So while you don't necessarily own it, you can trade it. There is an exception in relation to uploading, but Sony can do what it likes with your content. You grant the usual enormous license for them to do whatever they like. So theoretically, you could put your own face on your avatar, upload it there, and the next thing you find that your face is the face of Sony. They have a right to use whatever gets put up there. Up it goes. But more importantly than all this, I think, in our context of who should own what and what's fair and what encourages investment, is this godlike power that Sony retains to change people's lives, move mountains, take property, devalue currency, and kill your avatar with a flick of a switch, in what I call the power to smote. Now, for anyone who actually reads the license, the decision to play and invest in EverQuest must be tempered by this clause that basically says we can pull the plug at any time. And so in considering whether to hook into EverQuest and invest a lot of time in there, the player needs to then think about what's actually on offer. So let's have a quick run back over it. The developer owns all the rights to the game. Yeah, right. Player is only permitted to buy and sell the game content through station exclusives. You suffer that one. If you own any rights, then they're yours, but we can do what we want. A lot of people will be feeling slightly uneasy about that. And then Sony can shut down the entire world whenever it chooses. Now, if you're investing seriously, that would have to be a big one to worry about. So we ask the question, would you invest in that? Clearly, a lot of people have. But let's compare this to Second Life now. So, the difference between the two largely is that Linden Lab basically provides a very laissez-faire type of approach. It's just saying it's a service provider. It says we just allow people to get in there and play amongst themselves. We don't control the content, but they do. And it's kind of up to you. It specifically warns people that other players can enter the service. It goes on to say that you retain copyright. Though you see at the end it says to the extent you have such rights. So you retain what you have. What have you actually got? And this comes back to the issue of what does the Copyright Act say about these things? Now again, the full analysis of these issues is beyond us today. Very happy to talk about it afterwards. But let me make some brief comments. Certainly, for copyright works that kind of exists in the real world already and then transposed into the virtual world, for example, like a BBC broadcast, it's pretty clear. BBC owns it. They had it before, and they put it into Second Life. They still own it. The IP ownership issues, as I mentioned with reference to Halo 3, become a little bit more complex when it's created in-game. I'll provide a bit of an easier example. Let's say if a building was created using the Linden Lab design system, the player used texture skins. So these are probably not supplied texture skins here, but there might be elements of the floor that perhaps were a pro forma skin that Linden had applied. If that's the case, copyright works would be conceivably jointly owned. The problem for that is that the law says if there's a joint ownership, neither person can do anything without the other person's consent. It's kind of a lockdown. And in many situations that works really well, because if you're in a partnership with someone creating a bit of audio or a game sequence, whatever it is, the base position is that neither of you can run off and do something with it without the other person's permission. But in reality, it can pose some trouble. And that position in the terms is a bit inconsistent with what they say in their kind of marketing blurb. shoot a Machinima movie short in the real world, in world, and they say you can sell it as a pilot for a cable network. Not only is all this permitted, it's encouraged. I think they're oversimplifying it a bit and may give people the wrong ideas. It's echoed in a much lesser degree in the other terms. You create it, you own it, and it's yours to do with it as you please. Certainly a considerable leap from the conceptual framework adopted by Sony, acknowledges and fosters the incentives we talked about before. And for people who know that there is a certain security and ownership there, it encourages them to invest time and money in the game. So for Second Life players, the things they consider, player retains any rights they may have, good. There's no guarantee of ownership or control, but the user agreement doesn't seek to interfere with the balance that's there already. They purport to authorise players to go forth and do what they like, which would set up a certain form of licence to do that at law. But then we look a bit deeper and we see that, in fact, Linden Lab have the same power to smoke that Sony says, ultimately, that they can delete any and all of your content. Now look, from a legal perspective, if I was advising a developer, I would certainly suggest having a clause like that in there. I mean, you think about the immense claims that could be made if they had a total server malfunction, the whole thing goes down for a week, the company runs out of money, shuts down, no one wants to buy it, that type of thing. The claims could be enormous, and so having a clause that just says we're not responsible should that kind of thing happen makes a lot of legal sense. But from a player and investor perspective, it really undermines the confidence. And again, you ask that question, well, would you invest? And if there are any smart asses in the audience, you might say IBM did, to the tune of about $100 million. Now, a lot of others have as well, of course, but I guess kind of my point is that maybe the investments would be larger if there was a greater level of security. And perhaps these companies in fact do deals on the side with Linden Lab, giving them an extra element of security. I don't know. I mean, theoretically, you could get some real nastiness going on. You could have Apple offering Linden Lab a large amount of money to make access to IBM's archipelago suddenly become a lot more difficult, or killed completely. If IBM's just subscribing to these terms, they probably wouldn't have a great comeback. So the user or the company must ask itself, what is the real value of my IP in this virtual world where the developer really has such unyielding power? Now, I just want to compare it to the real world for a moment. In the real world, the Australian government, who we might consider as a games developer, but arguably much less exciting, they can take your property. They can take your house, for example, for the purposes of putting a highway through. And there's some broad kind of bases on which they can do that. It's not quite a win, but it can get close. But then there are regulations and processes, courts that can review the decision. And it's in the Constitution that says that they must give a reasonable amount of compensation for that. But in the user agreements that we've seen, there isn't any law, regulation, watchdog or compensation. It must be abided by or paid. So in some ways, it's a bit like investing in a country with no laws, no rules, no courts, no reference to justice in any way. A number of real-world countries spring immediately to mind. But even in those countries, investments can still be protected by physical presence. Armed guards, for example, mercenaries, whatever BP needs to do to